He raised his voice, fists clenched, the hallway buzzing with laughter and taunts behind him, until she didn't flinch. Until the quiet old woman, standing alone against the wall of lockers, looked him straight in the eye and said one sentence that silenced the school. Around them, students had their phones out, waiting for another viral moment, expecting her to cry, to back away, to crumble. But she didn't. She just stood there, still, calm, unshaken. They saw her gray hair and called her weak. They saw her floral scarf and thought she didn't belong. But wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. And in that stillness, she didn't raise her voice or her hand. She simply revealed a truth so heavy, so powerful that 10 seconds later, the school bully would wish he'd never laid a hand on her. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from, and tell us, has someone ever underestimated you, only to regret it? Miss Loretta James hadn't walked the halls of a school in nearly 4 years. Not since the day she buried her husband, a beloved history teacher who spent his final years teaching kids how to find truth in the world and strength in themselves. At 67, she returned not as a judge with a gavel, but as a quiet substitute with a clipboard and a floral scarf wrapped gently around her neck. Her silver curls framed a thoughtful face lined with wisdom, and behind her glasses sat eyes that had seen both justice served and denied. She didn't command attention with volume. She never had to. Her presence alone carried weight, the kind that didn't announce itself but lingered in the air like gravity. Today was her first time back in a school since her loss, and every step in that hallway was a quiet act of courage. The hallway was long, loud, and electric with teenage energy. Students leaned against lockers, chatting, joking, filming the world as they saw it through quick laughs and phone screens. None of them noticed the woman with the calm expression and slow, deliberate walk. To them, she was just some old sub, a placeholder until someone younger, louder, or more relevant arrived. They didn't know her name. They didn't ask. They didn't see the years she had spent on the bench, the courtrooms she had held in silence, the lives she had redirected with sentences not of punishment but of perspective. Across the hallway stood Chase Miller, 17, tall, confident in the way only someone insulated by privilege could be. He wore arrogance like a uniform, tossing around insults and shoulders with equal ease. The school feared him in that unspoken way teens do. No one wanted to be his target. He thrived on control, on being the loudest presence in the room. But beneath the swagger lived a restlessness, a simmering insecurity he buried under performance. He was the kind of boy who mistook silence for weakness and kindness for something to trample. Loretta noticed him the moment she stepped into the hall. She watched him, not with judgment, but with the piercing stillness of someone who had seen this behavior before, in courtrooms, in closed-door offices, in young men who had never been challenged the right way. As he laughed with his circle, pushing another boy down the hall, the crowd's energy shifted. Phones came up. Voices rose. The corridor wasn't just a hallway anymore. It was a stage, and Chase was performing. Miss Loretta stood at the edge of that scene, unnoticed, a witness dressed in softness. But the students didn't know that the quiet woman they ignored had once held entire courtrooms in breathless silence. And they certainly didn't know that today, in this hallway, justice wasn't walking with noise. It was walking in patience. The hallway echoed with laughter as Chase Miller cornered a younger student against a locker, tossing out cruel jokes, like candy at a parade. "Nice haircut, freshman. Did your mom use a blender?" The boy shrank under the weight of the crowd's amusement, his eyes darting around for an escape that wasn't there. Phones were already out. The hallway, once a place to pass through, had turned into a stage, and Chase was basking in the spotlight. From the other end of the corridor, Miss Loretta James watched quietly. She had seen that look before, the hunted one in the younger boys' eyes and the hunger in Chase's. But she didn't rush in. She walked forward slowly, cutting through the crowd like a quiet breeze through fire. When she reached the group, she simply said, "That's enough." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm, measured, like a bell tolling in the distance. Chase turned, the crowd parting behind him. He looked at her with exaggerated confusion, then broke into a mocking grin. "You lost, Grandma? This is a high school, not a bingo hall." Laughter erupted again, louder this time. Students nudged one another, expecting the old woman to turn and walk away, humiliated. But Loretta didn't move. She just looked at Chase, not with anger, but with something deeper. Disappointment. That look, the kind that holds more weight than words, hung in the air like a storm cloud. Chase didn't like it. That silence, that stillness, it unnerved him. He stepped forward, puffing his chest. "Didn't you hear me?" he snapped, and with a smug flick of his hand he shoved her shoulder. Gasps rippled through the hall. A few phones dropped. The laughter froze mid-breath. But Loretta didn't stumble. Her body barely shifted. Instead, she straightened slowly, gracefully, and looked him square in the eyes. Her hands remained by her side, her jaw steady. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't raise her voice. But something in that silence, in that unwavering stare, pierced deeper than any slap. Chase blinked, suddenly unsure. The noise of the hallway faded into a heavy silence as everyone watched. Then, softly, so softly it forced everyone to lean in. Loretta spoke. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, voice calm, almost gentle but lined with iron. The question didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a reckoning. And in that one moment, standing alone in a crowded hallway filled with noise, lights, and ignorance, Miss Loretta James took back the floor. Not with force, but with presence. The story wasn't his anymore. It was hers now. The hallway, just moments ago buzzing with laughter and phone cameras flashing like a red carpet event, had gone eerily still. A dozen screens were still raised, but no one was laughing anymore. One student, curious and suspicious of the old woman's unshakable calm, quickly typed Loretta James into a search bar. The name returned headlines, case files, speeches, federal, judge, civil rights warrior, advocate for juvenile justice. "Oh my God," she whispered loud enough for others to hear. Another student beside her gasped, eyes wide as he read over her shoulder. Chase's smirk faltered as whispers grew louder. The crowd, now leaning in closer than ever, wasn't there for the bully anymore. They were drawn to the woman who hadn't lifted a finger but now held the entire hallway in suspense. Miss Loretta took one step forward, her voice soft but clear as a bell. "Loretta James," she said, her words floating above the silence like a gavel striking down. "Former federal judge. I've sentenced people twice your size with half your rage. I've seen the real damage arrogance does when it isn't checked." Chase's face drained of color. She wasn't done. Her eyes scanned the hallway, locking onto every face, every screen. "I helped rewrite the juvenile justice system so the children with no one to speak for them wouldn't end up behind bars for a mistake. I pushed through court reforms to stop children like the one you just humiliated from becoming a case file. I've walked halls like this since long before. You could spell your own name, Chase Miller." At the sound of his name, Chase flinched. His hands, once curled in fists, now hung loosely at his sides. Just then, the principal pushed through the crowd, his tie crooked and panic written across his face. "Miss James, Miss Loretta, I had no idea you were here today. I assure you we'll handle this. I deeply apologize on behalf of—" She raised a hand, not to silence him, but to gently redirect him. Her tone was kind, but unmistakably firm. "No need to apologize for him, Principal Bennett. Let the boy speak now. Let him explain himself. This is his moment to be heard, for better or worse." Chase looked like he might disappear into the floor. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stared at the faces watching him. Faces that once laughed at his jokes, now staring at him with something between shame and pity. I didn't know who you were," he muttered. "I didn't mean—" He swallowed hard, voice trembling. "I'm sorry. It wasn't the loud, performative apology some might give. It was raw, and for the first time in a long time, real." Loretta nodded once. "I don't need your apology," she said, voice still steady. "But maybe the boy you shoved does." She turned to the freshman, now standing at a safe distance, eyes wide with disbelief. Chase followed her gaze. After a long pause, he stepped toward the boy, shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, man," he said quietly. "Really." The crowd shifted, not just in posture, but in perception. What they saw wasn't just a reversal of roles, it was a revelation. Miss Loretta hadn't needed to yell, push, or fight. Her strength wasn't in the way she reacted, but in the way she held her ground, dismantled power with truth, and turned a bully into a boy facing himself. The cameras were still rolling, but for once, no one cared about views. They were witnessing something more important, what real authority looks like when it's rooted in grace. The weight of the moment still lingered in the air when Loretta took a slow breath and gently removed her glasses, tucking them into her blouse as if preparing to speak not as a former judge but as a woman reclaiming a deeper truth. "My husband," she said quietly, "was a teacher, a kind man, the kind who stayed late to help struggling students, the kind who brought pencils from home so no child would ever feel unprepared." Her voice didn't tremble, but each word carried the ache of memory. He died protecting a student during a fight in a hallway just like this. He stepped between two boys who didn't know how to put down their fists, and he paid the price for believing every child was worth saving. The hallway fell into a deeper silence, the kind that stripped away ego and replaced it with understanding. Phones lowered, breaths held. Chase, once so tall and loud, now looked impossibly small. His shoulders curved inward, his hands no longer, seeking dominance but safety, as if trying to hide from the shame creeping up his spine. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze, the cocky bravado drained from his face. He had seen strength before, but never like this, not wrapped in quiet, not dressed in floral scarves and patience. He had never imagined that the woman he mocked had walked through more pain than he could comprehend, and still came back, not to punish, but to teach. "I didn't walk back into a courtroom," Loretta continued, her voice like a slow tide. "I walked into a school, because this is where justice starts. Not behind a bench, not in a jail cell, but right here, in these halls, with moments like this." She looked across the crowd. Not with judgment, but with something closer to sorrow, maybe even hope. You all think justice is loud, that it comes in sirens or fists, but real justice, real change, starts when someone chooses not to become what hurt them. With nothing more to say, she turned and began walking down the hallway. No mic drop, no applause, just the soft click of her heels fading into the distance, leaving behind a stunned silence that no bell could break. Students stepped aside as she passed, no longer just seeing her as some old sub, but as someone who carried a storm beneath her calm. Chase remained by the wall, eyes distant, hands slack. No one laughed anymore. Not at him, not at her, not at anyone. He didn't follow her. He didn't speak. He just leaned back, exhaling a breath that sounded more like surrender. The hallway had changed, not in its design, but in its energy. And for the first time in his life, Chase Miller felt what it meant to be truly seen, and truly small. By the following morning, the video had already spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "Retired Judge Shuts Down High School Bully with One." Elaine and Wisdom Wears a Scarf. Loretta James Silences with Grace. News anchors replayed the clip where she stood calmly, hands by her side, asking Chase Miller, "Do you know who I am?" But while the world was captivated by her silence, the real transformation was happening inside the school walls. Students who had once laughed without thought now walked the hallways more cautiously, more kindly. There was a pause where there used to be impulse, a second thought where there had only been ego. Loretta hadn't just silenced a bully, she had shifted an entire school's spirit. The principal called her the very next week, voice a mix of awe and pleading. "Miss James," he said, "we need you back, not as a sub, as something more." And so she returned, not to teach from a textbook, but to build something that would outlast her presence. She launched a restorative justice program, small. At first, just a circle of students meeting twice a week in the library after hours. But word spread. The hallway watchers, the pranksters, the bullied, and the bullies, they began to show up, not to impress, but to understand. Loretta sat among them, not above them, letting silence teach as often as her voice did. Letters began to appear in her mailbox, some handwritten in messy block print, others typed with care. "You made me see my anger for what it is. Thank you for not yelling. That scared me more. You remind me of my grandma. She passed last year. I wish I could tell her about you." Slowly, the school's heartbeat changed. Laughter still echoed, but it was lighter, no longer sharpened at someone's expense. Fewer phones came out when tensions rose. More students stepped in instead of stepping aside. As for Chase Miller, he was suspended for 2 weeks. It was a quiet affair, no public shaming, no spectacle. When he returned, the swagger was gone. He avoided Loretta at first, head down, steps quiet, but weeks later he showed up at one of her mentorship sessions, sat at the back, said nothing, just listened. The next week, he came again, then again, and eventually he spoke. "I used to think power was about being feared," he said. "You showed me it's about being remembered." Loretta didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply placed a book in front of him, a journal, a fresh start. Months passed. Spring bloomed. The school held a small assembly in Loretta's honor. No stage, no fireworks, just a framed tribute in the lobby. For the woman who reminded us that true power doesn't need a gavel. A plaque below it read, Judge Loretta James, Mentor, Guardian. Light. One afternoon, long after the final bell rang and the halls had emptied of noise, Loretta remained. She sat alone on the bench just beneath the row of lockers where it had all begun. The sun dipped through the high windows, casting long golden rays across the tile floor. In her lap, a stack of student journals. On her face, a faint smile, not one of pride, but of peace. She looked down the hallway not as a courtroom, not as a battleground, but as a garden just beginning to grow. She didn't teach with lectures. She taught with presence. They saw a quiet old woman. They didn't see the storm she carried beneath her silence. Miss Loretta James didn't need a raised voice or clenched fist to command respect. She only needed truth, patience, and the weight of a life lived in service of justice. In a hallway built on noise and power plays, she became a mirror, showing every student what strength really looks like when it walks in calm and listens before it speaks. She didn't just change a bully, she changed a school, and she did it, without ever shouting once. Have you ever seen someone mistaken for weak, only to reveal their true strength in a way that silenced the room? If Miss Loretta's story inspired you, share it with someone who believes that quiet people can change the loudest rooms. And tell us in the comments, what does strength mean to you? Thanks for watching. Stay with us for more stories where wisdom speaks softly, but leaves an echo.